Welcome to another episode, Pound for Pound Boxing Report, episode 211. I'm your host, Michael. Joining me this week, Jacob from Jab Hook, Daniel from the Inscriber. What's going on, fellas? What's going on?
What's up?
Good evening.
For those who are new, Pound for Pound Boxing Report, Pound for Pound Boxing Report, live YouTube show, podcast, as well as blog discussing all things boxing. The motto is when it's good, we will talk about it. When boxing is bad, we will talk about it. Bottom line is, if it concerns the sweet science, we will talk about it. For those who want to find out any and all information regarding Pound for Pound Boxing Report, the blog page is the place to go to. P4P Boxing Report .wordpress.com. That's the link. You check the right of the page. You will find the links to our channels and pages on G Plus, YouTube, Twitter, Tumblr, Facebook, and also links to listen to the show on SoundCloud, iTunes, Google Play Music, Stitcher Radio for the folks in the UK. Not Stitcher Radio Player FM, excuse me, for the folks in the UK, as well as our Mixcloud. Let's get the show going. Focus on kind of the biggest, highest profile bout of this past weekend. Jeff Horn, for those who don't know, he's the guy who upset Manny Pacquiao last July 4th, I believe, last summer. Traveling to the U.S. To fight Terence Crawford. Fight took place in Vegas on ESPN Plus. And I'll go to you, Jacob. First 3-4 rounds, Horn applied a lot of pressure to Bud, made him a little bit uncomfortable at times. But once Crawford found his bearings and started to figure Horn out in round 4, 5. He didn't just beat Horn; he beat him up, in my opinion. Punched him with big left hand with power punches to the head and body, to the point that he made Horn quit. I think the ending was in round 8 or 9. Overall, very impressive performance by Crawford, in my estimation. It shows once again how multifaceted Bud Crawford is. He can adjust to any styles. I was troubled with some of the commentary from Horn's camp heading into the fight. The fact that they was complaining about the heat in the gym, the fact that he initially did not make weight, but yet and still, you have to give Bud credit for the victory and his initial foray in the welterweight division. And he's basically letting these guys out here at 147 know, I'm here.
Yeah, I mean, I have the app, and so I got to watch it. I was actually at the Maurice fight, and so it was, I think, the end of the Trout Charlo fight. We were watching kind of both on my phone, but yeah, Crawford deserves a lot of credit here. I mean, I didn't give Horn a single round. I thought, Horn was very predictable. He just kept on kind of like charging in and throwing like the right hand, and Bud would step to the side and clock him, and basically he could see everything coming. And Horn tried to get a little rough in there and actually was doing a lot of rabbit punching and kind of hitting behind the head and stuff like that. But, Crawford didn't get frustrated. He just kind of, in a way, kind of roughed him back up and was, trying to show him that he's the strong guy here. I'm not too high on Jeff Horn. I don't really think that he's all that great. I know, the victory against Pacquiao, which I actually had Pacquiao winning that fight, but I mean, he got the victory, and he had his whole countrymen, with him, and a lot of people were saying that Horn's size was going to be too much for Crawford, but I didn't see it. It went a lot longer than I thought the fight would, but I kind of think that's Terence Crawford's way of how he deals with fights. I think if he wants to, he could have blasted Horn out of there early, but he likes to punish people. He likes to kind of, string them along and like hurt them and, give them an accumulation of punches and punishment and to kind of make a point. And he definitely put the welterweight division on notice. So I'm excited to, see if he can get a unification fight or fight one of these top guys. I mean, I definitely have him beating the likes of a Thurman or the winner of Garcia Porter And then, of course, the Spence fight is very interesting for many reasons, but we'll see.
Your thoughts on the fight, Daniel?
I had the same ascension where, like, the first few rounds, Horn was able to use his size a little bit to his advantage, but you could just tell that Bud was slowly getting the timing together, slowly figuring out the holes in Horn's defense, and then it started showing from probably the fifth round on. Bud started laying it on, started landing right hands, started landing lefts. Ultimately, I think it was the eighth or ninth round where he dropped Horn, and he got the stoppage. It wasn't. You can try to say it wasn't a spectacular knockout, but a lot of times the best knockouts aren't spectacular. A lot of times the best knockouts are just knockouts where the guy just is worn down at the end, and this is what Horn was. Horn was worn down in the end. He spent a lot of his energy in those first 3 or 4 rounds trying to see if he can just bully Bud into submission. And he wasn't able to. Bud weathered whatever Horn threw at him and ultimately started timing him and ultimately started landing combinations and won the fight in pretty good emphatic fashion. And it was a good showing by Bud. There's a good sentiment that he made a case that he's not just a champion. He's probably one of the top 3, not the one of the top 2 welterweights now. And as I said, that's even now counting Pacquiao still in the mix. So that has to be a very, very, very satisfying win for Bud, especially after all the comments that Horn's camp went at him with.
After it's already being talked about that Bud will fight in October in his hometown of Omaha. October 13th, I think, is the rumored date against Benavidez. But in the immediate aftermath of this fight, the talk, at least amongst in my circles, was the thought of a potential fight between Terence Crawford and IBF champion Errol Spence, who's going to defend his belt this weekend. I'll just open up for both of you if you want to respond. Much debate about a potential fight between Crawford and Spence. Give your thoughts on that right quickly before we move on.
I would like to see Crawford fight, a Thurman or Garcia Porter. I think Garcia and Porter are fighting for the belt that Thurman had to drop, I believe. But I'd like to see him fight them first before he fights Spence. I mean, I definitely would like to see Thurman fight Spence before he fights Crawford too, because that was something that was supposed to happen, and I kind of think that Spence has earned that. And then, if both of them win and have, the belts, then you can have a unification fight, which would be, fantastic. And I couldn't really pick a winner right now because, it's tough. I want to see how Spence looks. But he's a big welterweight, and, for as talented as Crawford is, I'm not counting Spence out, definitely. But again, Crawford is, he might go down as one of, the all-time greats, if he keeps on racking up these accomplishments. But yeah, I mean, I had made a prediction that potentially Crawford could leave Top Rank, because the problem that Crawford is with now is that I don't see a lot of welterweights or top welterweights that Top Rank has, and if they're all playing on the other side of the road, and the way he kind of hypes up Lomachenko and kind of puts him ahead of Crawford in the sense, I think, and when he speaks about both of these fighters, which I have Crawford above Lomachenko, I don't know, that can maybe rub Crawford the wrong way, and if he wants these fights and if Arum can't deliver them, we can see some little rift there.
This show is being recorded live uh, Wednesday, June 13th. Bud Crawford's scheduled to be on First Take tomorrow morning, and I'm pretty sure that Max and Stephen A will mention Errol Spence on the show tomorrow morning. And um, from what I've seen from Crawford in his camp, he's more than willing to fight an Errol Spence. I'm sure Spence is just as willing to fight him. So you can already see the drum beating for a potential fight between Crawford and Spence down the road. So talk about that as well as the other fights potentially for both Crawford and Spence that Jacob was mentioning, Daniel.
Well, let's tackle first the Benavides thing. First of all, Joe Benavides is not ranked at all by the WBO, and that's in under top 20. So this has to be if this is the fight, it has to be involuntary, and it just makes sense to the fact that those two have talked a lot of smack to each other over the past year. So it kind of makes sense, and it's a fight that Bud could win easily. It'd be a good proclamation. The question, though, is in this case, if not Spence and not Benavides, would a WBO force mandatory? Because interestingly enough, if I'm looking at the rankings right now for welterweight of the WBO,
that would be Manny Pacquiao.
Yep, that would be Manny Pacquiao. And we know that one of Aram's grand plans was always to feed Pacquiao to Bud.
Yeah. Aram recently said that he doesn't want that fight for Pacquiao.
Or he's going to try to, or maybe they'll shift this, okay, I'll feed you to Lomachenko then. Either way, he's going to feed him to somebody, unfortunately. But, and then when you look into it, then number 3 is a Lithuanian, Egidijus Kavaliauskas. Then Danny Garcia, Giovanni Santillan, Sean Porter. And then the rest, Roberto Orazia, Stephen Dano, Luis Alberto Duron, and then no other names that are recognizable from then on. So from a logical standpoint, the Spence fight makes more sense because it's a natural born rivalry. Both of these guys fight with a chip on their shoulder. It's just they do it in a different way. Spence just beats you into submission. Crawford will beat you and then talk shit to you while he's doing it or afterwards. But both of them will latch onto something. They're one of those fights that latch onto something that'll piss them off about the opponent. Whether it's actions, whether it's statements. It could even be something as simple as not shaking hands in the weigh-in. But those two could easily fight each other. The issues, though, like Jacob mentioned, is it's on the other side of the fence. Like I mentioned, that not a lot of those guys that I just mentioned in the WBO rankings have an affiliation with Top Rank. And we, like you mentioned, Mike, he's going to be on First Take tomorrow. So obviously ESPN is investing in Bud Crawford. It's very, very difficult for you to send a guy that's clearly a priority. You're putting him on one of your top programs and just have him say, okay, we had to fight in Showtime. Whether it's like a Danny Garcia or Sean Porter or Errol Spence or even Keith Thurman. That's going to be a difficult decision that Bud's team has to measure. Because unless more defections come from the PBC, where guys actually get signed to promoters, and then the promoters can actually negotiate, there's not a lot of room. They probably going to have to force the issue when it comes to when it comes to this fight with Spence, particularly when the rivalry, like I said, it can be easily made. Both guys have a chip on their shoulders. It's also Texas versus Nebraska. We know how big that rivalry is when it comes to states, particularly with football. And we know how popular each is in their own state. So the drum beats are starting, and right now it's the fight that makes logical sense for both guys if they want to make their mark.
Let's move on to more action that took place this past weekend. Going to move on to LA specifically. Doubleheader on Showtime. Jacob, you was at this doubleheader. Leo Santa Cruz, his rematch with Abner Mars. Jermell Charlo fighting Austin Trout. Want to go with Charlo Trout first. I'll go to you, Jacob, since you was in the building. Um, Trout won by, I think it was split decision. I don't
Charlo
understand.
won.
Charlo won, excuse me. Charlo won by split decision.
Majority
Okay,
decision.
majority decision. I don't get that. I thought Charlo won clearly. Some criticism of Charlo after the fight. I totally didn't understand it, comparing his win over Trout with Jared Hurd. To me, they're just two different fighters, Charlo and Hurd. I wasn't mad with the way Jermell Charlo performed. Um, he's a boxer puncher. He slowly broke him down. His youth and his power and his strength served the difference, but you knew because of Trout's defense, he was going to have some issues getting to him. But I think he adjusted well. I liked some of the things he did from a technical standpoint. And I thought it was just a solid overall performance. Being in the building at ringside, or in the crowd, I should say, your impressions on how Charlo looked against Trout.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you, Mike. I don't, you know, first thing is the walkout. He came in his lion suit, which was pretty funny. He kind of looked like Trout was going to fight a mascot for like a sports team. But I thought that Charlo, dominated the fight. It'd be hard for me to give Trout, maybe at the most 3 rounds. So it's ludicrous that they had one of the judges had it a draw. I didn't understand it at all. And Charlo had 2 knockdowns, or 2 counted knockdowns. I think the first one was more of a kind of a slip, but it was counted as a knockdown. So, that part was crazy. I think, Charlo's been getting a lot of backlash for the performance or the fight itself. And I think Trout deserves as much of the booze as maybe Charlo does, in the sense that, Trout wasn't engaging at all. At the weigh-ins, Trout had talked about him being the big, I'm the bigger guy and I'm going to show him, show him in the ring. But he was backing up most of the fight. He wasn't really engaging. He didn't throw too many punches, and I thought he was clearly losing the fight, and there was no sense of urgency from him. At least to me, it seemed. And Charlo is, he's very cautious, but, he would attack in spurts. And, I thought he did what he had to do, which win the fight. I think he was looking to knock him out, of course. But it just didn't happen. It just didn't come. He had him, Trout shook a couple times, but, Trout's a resilient guy. He's been stopped one time, but it wasn't like he got knocked out. He just, they stopped it, I think, against the Hurd fight not that long ago. But, if Charlo can get that Hurd fight, I think it's a very interesting fight. I think with Hurd, he's a big guy, but, he's also very hittable. And, if Charlo lands, some of these punches like Trout did against Hurd, which there's some very competitive rounds in that fight where I thought Hurd was, looked a little hurt. And Trout's not known for being a power puncher, but Charlo, I think he could definitely win that fight. I think it would be an exciting fight. I think the lead up to it would, of course, create all kinds of, shit talking opportunities. But, to me, Charlo did what he had to do. I think there's maybe a slight tint of racism, unfortunately, here, because, both Charlos are very outspoken. And, I couldn't even hear what he was saying, when they were talking to him in the ring, because the whole crowd was booing him. every time he would talk, they would just boo him like hardcore. But you get a fighter like Conor McGregor, who I can't stand, who's also a major shit talker, and it's like these same people, they love him. So it's like, like what's going on here? Like he won the fight. He's backing it up. He's knocking guys out. Like I don't understand what the problem is with Charlo.
Oh, the different reactions between the two, where it can be argued that McGregor is even more outrageous than the Charlos. I mean, at least the Charlo brothers, they don't bum rush folks on the bus, acting like a thug. Of course, if they did, they would be called just that, a bunch of thug this and thug that. But same folks will be upset. They look at McGregor and kind of give him a pass. So I guess that's what you're referring to, Jacob.
Yeah, I mean, to me, it's a little, to me, a little kind of sign of society, because McGregor seems to get a pass, and I agree with you. I think he does more outlandish stuff than the Charlos, and the difference is that the Charlos are backing it up, and McGregor isn't. But he still talks like he's the king of the world, and he's the one with losses. So I just don't understand it. And like I said, I think there's a hint of, unfortunately, like, a little bit of that, racism, or for some reason, people don't embrace, the trash talking, and they allude to thugs versus, oh, that guy's just confident.
Your thoughts, Daniel?
Overall, in this fight, like I said, when I did predict a split decision on Twitter, and if it wasn't for those knockdowns, it would have been a split decision, because Trout was crafty enough to weather the storm that Jermell was trying to throw at him, and Jermell didn't really do much as far as setting up his jab, trying to set up combinations. For the most part, he was trying to bum rush Trout to get him out of there, and almost like him trying to make a statement in a way, to probably say, I can take this guy out in a way that is better than Jarrett Hurd, or I could take this guy out, the guy that my brother couldn't take out. Because we know there's, when it comes to family, when it comes to brothers, we know there's always some type of sibling rivalry, whether it's friendly or not. And with the Charlo twins, it's pretty obvious who the bigger guy is in Jermell. But Jermell even had to go, like I said, had to go to find a different trainer to find his own niche, and he's improved well in that. The problem, though, is because he didn't set up his jab to set up combinations, because he tried to bum rush, he pretty much let Trout, in many instances, dictate the exchanges, or dictate how he would get away from them, which is what ultimately happened. The fight wasn't as exciting as what a lot of people hoped. Didn't produce an emphatic knockout, although there were two knockdowns. One of them is questionable. The other one was pretty clear a knockdown. But it was a good win for Jermell, because Austin Trout is his best opponent on paper to date since winning the title. The crowd reaction, I said it yesterday, Mike, I think it's a mixture of, there were probably, you get a big crowd of Mexican fans, some of them that might be fans of Canelo. And we know the Charlos, both of them have talked a lot of smack concerning Canelo. Part of that may feed into it, and part of it is they followed the Mayweather playbook as far as being loud, being confident. And one thing that the Mayweather playbook will get you is it'll get you booed from a good majority of a crowd. But guess what? And I guess in their eyes, you boo me, so you'll come to my next fight hoping to see me lose. That's what Floyd did, pretty much. Like, he acted in a certain way where people spend their money to hopefully watch him lose. And that's pretty much, I think, what both Charlos are doing. Did it get a little bit out of hand on Saturday? Most likely, and not to mention the fact that, like I said, Southern California, it's full of Mexican fans, and full of Mexican fans that probably wanted knockouts. Charlo didn't provide one, so they were taking it on him. But it was a good victory overall for Jermell, and bring on Jared Hurd.
I just
Yeah,
want to
let's
point out
go ahead,
one
Jacob.
thing
I'm
though.
sorry.
When Trout, spoke, they cheered him like he was, like he was one of them. So and again, to me, Trout didn't do anything to me to show that he was really trying to win that fight. So you got one guy that gets booed for winning the fight and engaging most of the time, and then the other guy who didn't really do anything, he got cheers. So again, it's a weird situation.
Hmm. Let's move on to the main event of that doubleheader. Rematch between Leo Santa Cruz, Abner Mars. I'm going to you, Daniel. I look at this simply in a few words, 3 words, really. Styles makes fights. The first time they fought, I think in 2015, uh, Santa Cruz, he used his advantages in height and reach, stayed disciplined and boxed pretty much the majority of the bout. He got a clear cut, comfortable win. Same thing happened in this rematch Saturday. And that was the script. That's the bottom line for me. These guys could fight. They could fight 10 times. They could fight 50 times. They could fight 100 times, in my opinion, because of the particular styles, because of the physical advantages that Santa Cruz has over Abner Mars. It just would not matter. We will get the same result each and every time. Your thoughts, Daniel, then you can follow up, Jacob.
It was pretty much round 13 from then on, and it was just as simply the fact that Maurice and in the second Frampton fight were the fights where Santa Cruz actually used the physical advantages that he had, which was his height and which was his reach. He didn't use him at the first 3 rounds, obviously, because Maurice is a fast starter. He did land on him, but it was pretty much the same fight, almost down to the stats. It was pretty much the same fight. It's a fun fight, but it was a lopsided fight. Santa Cruz was better at distance. He jabbed better, landed the better combinations, won the majority of the exchanges. So it was a fight that I think if you can simulate this fight 10 times, 10 times out of 10, I think it's going to come out almost the same way. Probably with a difference within a round or two, but Santa Cruz is winning, and it's winning clearly. Now, could this, like I said, hopefully does this put Santa Cruz in a position where he can now unify? Hopefully so. Like I said, Abner Maurice has requested a rematch, and unfortunately Santa Cruz has said that if the fans want it, he'll do it. But it was pretty much what we saw when they fought the first time. Almost exactly what the first time, even down to the stats. It's a fun fight. Like I said, you watch this fight, it will always be a fun fight, but it'll always be a lopsided fight. Because Maurice, unfortunately, he gasses out a little bit after the first 6 rounds. And unfortunately Santa Cruz will always time him better and always land better at distance.
Your thoughts, Jacob.
Yeah, I mean, you guys said it pretty well. I totally agree. I think the styles with these two fighters, it's the results are going to probably be the same every single time. Neither one is a knockout puncher. So for me, for Mars to have a chance against Santa Cruz, is that he would have to have some fight changing power, which he doesn't. Santa Cruz is a very good boxer. He uses his distance very well. He does great inside work. Mares, to me, he's good, but he's to me a little bit overrated. he cannot. I mean, the left hook, he cannot block that thing to save his life. It's the same punch that he got knocked out against Gonzalez. Santa Cruz was landing it on him all night. You know, I think if Santa Cruz had executed that left hook a little bit differently and better, he probably could have knocked out Maurice. He had him shook up a couple times. But I thought Santa Cruz comfortably won the fight. It was an entertaining fight. Both guys gave it all. They're all. But a third fight is, in my opinion, completely unnecessary, and for not only their careers but for the division. If Santa Cruz can get that fight with Gary Russell, which is a very makeable fight since they're both with Heyman, I believe, that would be great. And then if I was Maurice, to keep myself relevant, try to get a fight with Frampton. And if he can beat Frampton, which I don't think he can, but if he does, then he could get that third fight with Leo, or the winner of Leo Russell Jr., and then, it would actually mean something to me. But when a fighter has won both fights, I think, even in a greater disparity this time, the second time, there's not really a reason for a trilogy, only if it, to entertain the fans. But these guys are trying to build, in my opinion, legacies and careers. So there's other fights out there, I think, that are better for Leo Santa Cruz, and I'd rather see a third Frampton fight since they split their fights than see a Maurice a third fight.
Yeah, I didn't get Abner Maurice calling for a third fight. I didn't understand it. He lost clearly the first time, lost clearly again. What made him do that, I don't know. Maybe because money, who knows? You mentioned Santa Cruz and Gary Russell, who has WBC belt at 126. Now we know Gary Russell has taken this bad habit, this bad annoying habit of fighting once a year. The question is, even though the fight is obvious, will that fight happen sooner or later? And either you can respond.
I think I think there's a good chance that it could happen sooner. Even though Russell has, publicly stated that he doesn't really care if he's active or not, I think, this would be a good challenge for him. He just got back past Jojo Diaz, in a very, close, entertaining fight. And I think that Gary Russell, brings interesting things to the table against Santa Cruz. He's got, of course, the hand speed. And then, he's got a little bit of pop in his punches. And, I think it'd be an interesting style matchup. And, again, they're both with Heyman, I believe. So there's no reason that they can't, get Showtime to have this as a main event and, get it on TV and get them both paid and, have this fight happen.
Thoughts on a potential fight between Leo Santa Cruz and Gary Russell, Danny?
Well, the WBC did say that the winner of this fight would be the next mandatory for Gary Russell. So it is logical, and it's probably plan A for Santa Cruz's team. Because like you mentioned, they're both without Heyman, so it should be an easy fight to make. But Gary Russell Jr. might make it hard, like I said, because unfortunately, like you mentioned, Mike, he has taken this position of saying he should only fight once a year. Now, option B is obviously a rematch with Frampton, and it's obviously a fight that both guys would probably like. They're both 1-1, so it's good to have the rubber match. And not to mention the fact that with Frampton having the WBO interim title, Santa Cruz fights him, Santa Cruz wins, it puts him then in a position to challenge the WBO featherweight champion Oscar Valdez, which once again puts then Al Heyman and Bob Arum back on the table. Option C is probably Maurice, because unfortunately, like I said, Santa Cruz has said if the fans want it, they're he'll be fine with giving it to him. And if there's enough fans in Southern California that are willing to show up for that fight once again, they'll do it. I just hope not, because, like I said, you fight those fights 10 times out of 10, you're going to get the same result, barring the round or two.
The fight between Horn and Crawford, as well as this doubleheader and the Showtime between Santa Cruz, Mars rematch, Jermell, Charlo, Trout. Two fairly good bouts, particularly the Horn Crawford bout, highly entertaining. That's the good part. So let's talk about the bad part and the what the hell moment of the weekend. Manchester, the return of Tyson Fury. I mean, the fuck? What was that? This that fight was a joke. The whole event was a joke. Farcical, fellas. Fury, yeah, he won by 4-round stoppage. The corner decided no more. But from the weigh-in, when it seems like Seferi, I don't care how I butcher his name because he's worthless to me, basically jumped into Fury's arms. Again, the fuck? The fight in up to the introduction to instructions from the referee during the face-off before the fight began, what looks like Fury leaned in and kissed dude, to the fight itself where both fighters were clowning. I mean, there was more action in the fights in the crowd than there were in the fight itself. Again, that was ridiculous. If I'm the folks in Manchester, I'm asking for my money back. All this stuff about the return of Fury and the return of Fury, I was pissed off at the end. That was ridiculous. And either guys can respond to either one of you can jump in on this because I'm done. I'm done.
I mean, I was done with Fury. I mean, I didn't watch the fight. I saw, the highlights and some of the, of course, some of the things that were on most, either social media or news outlets. But, to me, he's a joke. I don't care to see him. I don't want to see him against any top guy. I think he was never really that good to me, and I don't really want to waste time talking about him. And again, he was fighting a cruiserweight. So I mean, I don't know what the point of that was.
Yeah, like I may have been cut off, but I'll just reiterate again. The fuck was that?
First, like I said yesterday, let us apologize to any of our viewers in the UK for having to pay pay-per-view for that. Yes, folks, that Frank Warren made that a pay-per-view fight in the UK. Oh, dear Jesus. First of all, like I said, Fury's coming in almost at 280 pounds. And to think about it, he technically was supposed to have lost 100 pounds.
It came into the ring with I Got High.
Yeah. I Got High, yeah. That's one of them. And then obviously there was the kiss when the fighter instructions. And neither guy took this seriously. Like, Fury didn't do anything in the first round.
Yeah, like Seferi, I said, I may have been I may have been cut off, I may have been disconnected, but let me reiterate again. From that moment, from dude jumping into Fury's arms during the weigh-in, the kiss, which was okay, weird. And again, the clowning by both guys, and I saw more action in the crowd, the dust up in there, in the crowd fighting than I saw in the actual ring. Again, farcical. That was a joke.
Let's just tell you how seriously people took that fight. Both Fury and Seferi stopped to watch that brawl that was happening in the crowd. Usually in boxing, the item is protect yourself at all times. Obviously, that didn't happen, and you could tell like they were smiling throughout. Fury's half-assed trying. Hell, Fury is already sweating buckets even before the fight started. It was a travesty. And the fact you have to mention the post-fight interview, Fury says that Frank Warren would get him a world title shot at the end of the year. I think he can get him a title shot. It's just not going to be in the boxing ring. He could probably get a title shot in Nathan's hot dog competition. He can try to take down Joey Chestnut because he certainly has the size to do it.
I mean, I was offended. It's simple and plain. I was offended, and it looks like Fury is going to return to the ring in August on a card featuring Frampton. Don't know the opponent as of the recording of this show, but I have to see something significantly better than what we saw Saturday to give Fury any credit. I didn't give him any credit until he stepped back in the ring. And I'm sorry, he stepped back in the ring Saturday. But I still don't give him any credit. That's insulting. That's insulting to even call it a boxing match. It was insulting to even sanction that garbage. So yeah, you have to talk about it. But again, 2 thumbs down, plus 2 thumbs down plus 2 middle fingers for that nonsense we saw. Let's move on to the undercard. Terry Flanagan fighting Maurice Hooker, I believe for the vacant WBO belt. Vacated by Crawford. I go to you, Jacob. Very good bout. Hooker had the advantage first half of the bout. Flanagan was cut over both eyes, and that seemed to perk him up. He fought with a great sense of urgency, but Hooker held on, did just enough for the win. Career best performance, career best win for Hooker, who afterwards I believe is entering the World Boxing Super Series tournament, at 140 pounds. Your thoughts on Hooker's win, surprising win, on the road against Terry Flanagan?
Well, I'm sure Daniel's going to have more to say about this because, I think he wanted Hooker to win, and finally get rid of Terry Flanagan in a sense. But it was a good fight, again, it was a surprising decision, but I think Maurice Hooker deserved to win that fight. Flanagan was game, but ultimately, I think Hooker did more or enough to walk away with that victory. But since it's a split decision, we could see something, a rematch or something happen, after that. But again, it was a good overall fight. I didn't know a lot about Maurice Hooker entering into the fight, only that he was undefeated. But hopefully this opens up some other opportunities for him if they don't do a rematch straight off. And congratulations to him on grabbing that belt.
Your thoughts, Daniel?
It was an okay fight given the competition. Like I said, Hooker was able to land his right hand at will at times. Flanagan tried to counter. He tried to counter, did going southpaw a bit, landing a couple left hands. But got what I think it was the 9th round. 9th or 8th round when they butted heads and then like a big gash opened up in the middle of Flanagan's forehead. It was a decent fight given the circumstances. And like I said, I'm just mainly surprised at the results because a Frank Warren card in the UK, to be blunt, always suspects some fuckery in the scorecards if their fighter doesn't look good.
Nah, that was the main event.
Yeah.
The referee.
Yeah, likely he got saved on that, but the right guy won, and like I said, not much Terry Flanagan can do. Like I said, he's halfway decent, but he's in the division, I think, too high. And quite frankly, lightweight, well, he can't go to lightweight anymore because Lomachenko's there. So he's pretty much stuck in purgatory. As for Hooker, good on him for going to the World Boxing Super Series. Because that means the WBO champion is there. Relic, the WBA champion, is there. And let's see here. Is the IBF champion? I forgot. I don't think he is. The IBF champion is not there because we have no IBF champion at the moment because Mikey vacated. But it's good to have at least two of the champions in that tournament. And it's a good showing because now with that fighter, with fighters like Prograis in the division going in, and with, like I said, obviously Bud leaving, the field's wide open. So if you're Maurice Hooker, if you want to show that he can improve, that he has improved since that god-awful performance on Kovalev Ward 1, this is a good thing to do it. Like I said, and I think he becomes the second champion from his prospective city currently. So, but with that being said, F Rock Nation.
And he also needed the win to have the potential to earn some extra coin because let's face it, you need to find some way to support all those kids he has. I'm just saying, 8, yeah, he needs the money. He needed that win just as much more than Flanagan. I'm just saying. Let's move on to some news here. A lot of development, a lot of action over the last 24 hours regarding a potential rematch between Canelo and Triple G. We talked about this last week. We're going to talk about it again to start off the news segment. Last week, we reported that essentially Triple G had said no to a deal. Well, in the days in between last week's show and this show, Golden Boy made another offer to Triple G, offering him essentially 42%, 42.5, whatever it was. Gave him a deadline of 12 p.m. Pacific today. Initially, Triple G said no to the deal after they were close to agreeing, but it seemed like within an hour of that, De La Hoya on Twitter announced that the fight is happening. I'll go to you, Daniel. Reaction to the fact that apparently we're finally going to see Canelo Triple G, the rematch, September 15th.
A victory for principle. We have to say a victory for principle. Because Golden Boy could have really stuck to the guns and said, we're going to do 65-35, take it or leave it. But, like I said, Oscar and Eric Gomez, they're smart enough to know that as popular as Canelo is, he needs to really rehab his image. And no fight, even if it's like with a top guy like Danny Jacobs, which is what they were talking about, or Saunders, would have done the rehab work that the rematch with Golovkin would. And like I said, Golovkin stood his ground, and let's go over today. In the span of a couple of hours, Golden Boy goes from the fight is dead, we're pivoting the way to Danny Jacobs, while Tom Loeffler apparently said, we already had an agreement in place, should this fight not happen, for us to fight Billy Joe Saunders August 16th or the 26th at the Forum. Like I said, we already had a deal agreed to that in place should Gennady have refused to fight Canelo. Within that 2-hour span, Oscar must have heard about that, because whatever he did, whether it was raising the percentages to be 55-45 or even actually giving him 50-50, he made the fight. Like I said, it is the biggest fight of the American boxing calendar on U.S. soil, because obviously, like I said, there's another fight we're probably going to talk about later, possibly happening soon, that is, for all intents and purposes, bigger than Canelo Triple G. And At least it finally got through, because it started to get really, really annoying, this back and forth, because it started to getting into Maypac territory. And we remember, like, when Maypac happening, we reached a point where we just didn't care anymore. Luckily, it didn't reach that point, and both fighters seem to be ready. Canelo apparently released a video today, working out. We know Golovkin is in Russia right now for the World Cup opening ceremony. So ultimately, you're getting this fight, HBO pay-per-view, September 15th. Just get ready.
Given what you just disclosed, one, I'll go to you on this one, Jacob. One, I'm glad that they finally come to their senses, both Canelo and Triple G. As for A1, B2, if I am Martin Murray, I'm even more incensed because given what Daniel talked about, how they as a substitute, Triple G was ready to fight Billy Joe Saunders in August. That says to me that that supposed injury was some BS, and they just pulled and Saunders just pulled out of that fight because he thought that he was going to fight Triple G later on in the summer, but he kind of played himself because the fight that a lot of folks want to see, the rematch between Canelo and Triple G, is happening, and he's left out wondering what the world. So your reaction to all of that, Jacob?
Yeah, I mean, I wasn't. I mean, I'm probably one of the few people who wasn't really clamoring for the rematch. Daniel hit on a lot of good points in the sense that, Golden Boy is in a tough spot because they've had two of their more high profile fighters lose of recent, and Canelo, their breadwinner, they're not making money unless he's fighting. So, yes, he could, they can make money off him if he fights a Jacobs or Gary Sullivan or a bunch of different fighters. He'll still put asses in the seats, but I don't think they're going to make as much money as they can with Golovkin and the rematch. And so it's within Golden Boy's best interest to keep their star against the biggest fight that they can make, whether they what they were saying or not. So I'm kind of not surprised that the deal was finally made. And for Golovkin, again, this is we've talked about this before. This points to is he really about the belts or is he about the money? Which is okay. He can be about money, but don't have that be your narrative of being about the belts, because if it's true that they had this Billy Joe Saunders fight, off to the side, and him having lost his IBF belt, or being stripped of his IBF belt, I mean, he's now 2 belts away from unifying division. He has a chance to fight Billy Joe Saunders and bypass Canelo thing. But again, it must be, the money must be too much in order to it must be more important than the belts. That's my perspective on it. But yeah, Billy Joe. I think Martin Murray actually moved on from Billy Joe Saunders. I believe he has a fight already, replacement already planned. So I'm not sure, if how much of that had to do with it. But another thing is that Oscar De La Hoya, for some reason, has become one of those shit talkers. He was on Twitter telling somebody to find Golovkin so he can sign the papers, and he was getting a lot of backlash. People were telling him to have Canelo go find a needle, and a bunch of funny shit like that. But I think maybe it's because Oscar knows he needs Golovkin, because, like I stated earlier, Canelo's really the only one that's making money. The cupboard is very bare over at Golden Boy. I don't see a lot of stars that are in the making, or a lot they have to offer. So if Canelo isn't fighting, then in my opinion, they're not really making money. And if he's not fighting the big fights, then you're gonna have a problem.
And HBO may be the happiest of them all because, as we've talked about before, they don't have any bouts scheduled until August. And so, given what Showtime's doing, given what ESPN Plus and ESPN Plus, and what Airman's doing, they need this from a financial perspective. They need this more than anybody. So, it really saved their behinds in terms of boxing for the end of the year.
Unless something else happens. Well, I know we're going to get into that one, but ultimately, though, it is karmic justice in a way, like Jacob mentioned when it comes to Billy Joe Saunders, because not only did he screw Martin Murray once, he screwed him twice, like with a hand injury and then the quote unquote hamstring injury, which at the time looked to me like, okay, he's just not making the weight. Now it turns out like, oh no, I'm positioning myself towards Golovkin, and now he's left out in the lurch because Martin Murray's fighting Roberto Garcia instead now to keep him busy, at least do something. And now Saunders really much does not have a lot to do because luckily you can't go out and fight Jacobs. Jacobs has, by the way, been ordered by the IBF to fight Sergey Derevchenko for their vacant belt. So that takes him out. And I don't really see him trying to go after Jermell Charlo. So it puts him in a very, very bad spot, and it's karmic justice for Billy Joe Saunders. And ultimately, like I said, it does save the HBO count. Does save the HBO calendar, barring something major happening a month or two after.
Yeah, indeed. Let's move on to next news bit, which you was kind of hinting at, Daniel. Anthony Joshua, Deontay Wilder. Let's face it, that's the fight that everybody wants to see in the sport. Highest profile bout that can be made, biggest money bout that can be made. Well, it looks like we're moving one step closer to that bout as Monday, I believe it was. Deontay Wilder went to social media and basically announced that he has agreed to terms for a fight in the UK for later on this fall, I believe. Part of the deal was, part of the terms were that this is going to be a two-fight deal. First fight here, first fight in the UK, second fight in the rematch in the US. So essentially, Jacob, the ball is in Eddie Hearn's court now. Your reaction to Deontay Wilder agreeing in principle to a deal to fight Anthony Joshua?
I mean, like you said, it's the fight that we want. I'm kind of glad, that we're getting this fight, or hopefully getting this fight, now in their primes versus, years down the line. I think both fighters, to be honest, they want the fight, and they know it's the biggest fight to be made in the sport, and especially in the UK, it's going to be bonkers over there. It's going to be huge. And Anthony Joshua, I know a lot. Oscar likes to tout Canelo as the pay-per-view star and blah blah blah, but it's really Joshua is really, if you look worldwide, he's the guy. And I think both guys, they want to fight. They want to prove that they're the best, and I'm glad they were able to work these things out, and maybe they listened to the show because we were talking about it before. All these other heavyweight fights were being made, and there was talks of what's his face, the cheater Russian guy, Povetkin, getting a fight with Joshua, which I didn't think he deserved, but I hope it comes to fruition. in the fall, I believe is what they're saying. My one question would be, though, is that if there's a rematch already plugged into this deal, I'm wondering, like, if one of them, wins by early knockout, does that? I mean, if one of them blasts the other one out, is the rematch still, on the table, or is it still, to me, rematches are more for if it's a close fight or there's maybe a controversy or things like that, versus if somebody just straight knocks the other guy out, with no little or no resistance, then what's the rematch really offer? But I'm at the end of the day, I'm just glad that it looks like it's finally going to happen.
Your reaction, Daniel, to the fact that we're moving closer and closer, it seems, to a Joshua Wilder fight.
Optimism at first, because obviously Wilder, like I said, their team is smart enough to know that they can't overplay a position, they can't overplay leverage when they don't have a lot to begin with. And then like the little things start coming up. Like Eddie Hearn's statement regarding this, supposedly like, okay, we can have this fight in Wembley in October, November. It's like if this is before Povetkin. He used that phrase, this is before Povetkin. And that may be Eddie Hearn's out in this whole situation. Because the person that has been pretty hesitant in trying to make the deal has been Eddie Hearn. Every time Wilder's team presented something, like, remember, they presented a $50 million purse for Joshua. He changed the position in a way that almost seems like he tried to push the goalposts to see whether or not Wilder will back out. The latest one is the fight has to be in the UK, not ultimately realizing that Wilder is perfectly fine traveling to fight. Then there's a network issue. Because, like I mentioned with HBO is reportedly trying to make a big play to sign Anthony Joshua to a multi-fight deal. And if that winds up happening in the interim to this, then you have to negotiate a situation where you have to get HBO, Showtime, and because this fight's going to be UK, you have to get Sky Sports involved to do another simulcast a la Maypac. But the ball is definitely on Eddie Hearn's court. Wilder pretty much said, I'll do what I need to do to fight. Hopefully he gets us closer, but if Povetkin's team protests with the WBA and considering what happened to Eddie Hearn when it came to a purse bid of Dillian White and Kurov Pulev recently, I don't think he has the financial cojones, in a way, to match what the Russians would throw to get Joshua to fight in Moscow this year. So, cautious optimism, real conscious optimism, because the ball is on Eddie's court, and Eddie has shown if the ball's in his court when it comes to this particular fight, his tendency may be likely to try to find his way to take the ball and go home.
In terms of this deal with Showtime and HBO, don't know when the contract between Showtime and Joshua is officially over, it's officially done. And because we don't know, I don't think that will get in the way. I think if Showtime has any say so, they're going to do whatever they can to make this fight happen sooner or later because of that issue. Because the later they wait and they try and the contract expires, HBO, given their dire situation vis-a-vis boxing, they're going to do a full court press to try to sign Anthony Joshua. And if that happens, that's going to be trouble before a potential fight. So I think Showtime will do its damnness to make that fight happen, even if it means uh, stepping in and trying to pay out a possible step aside fee for Povetkin. I don't know if it works, but I can see that scenario happening. But at the end of the day, this is big news. This is a positive step. And ultimately, I think that there's just too much on the line for all parties involved uh, for this fight to not happen. It has to happen. Uh, uh, it would really suck. You talk about selling some wolf tickets if we hear this, if this news come about, and then ultimately we don't see the fight happen either this year or early first half next year. You talking about disappointment. Eddie Hearn, he can't afford to go through that. Showtime, they can't afford to go through that. Wilder, they can't afford to go through that. So I think um, I've been saying we will see a fight between them eventually, probably at the end of this year. And I'm holding my guns. I'm sticking to my guns on that. So I think at the end of the day, things will be settled, and we will see this fight. Shout out to Sean for joining us and for joining us in the chat. He mentioned another fight in the heavyweight division that was announced as well. When we did the show last week, we reported that Dillian White was going to fight Luis Ortiz. But after the show, it was announced that Dillian White is going to instead fight Joseph Parker on July 28 at the O2 Arena. A quick word from each of you fellas. Your reaction to that news that instead of fighting Ortiz, Dillian White will fight Joseph Parker, which is, let me say that Bob Arum was not too happy about because he thought he had it. He thought it was just basically uh, close to being signed that Parker fight Bryant Jennings, but they kind of turned on Bob Arum, and instead is going to fight Dillian White. Your thoughts, fellas?
It's crazy because that Jennings Parker fight was reported as basically done.
Yes.
And so, and I've heard Arum's displeasure with what went down, and I'm kind of I kind of hoped that the Jennings Parker fight was for real because that to me seems like a very good heavyweight fight. I'm a big fan of Jennings, and I think that would have been a great fight. But now, and then with White and Ortiz, I think that would have been another exciting, good matchup. But now, you got Parker fighting White, which is still a good matchup. But now you got two other guys kind of left off to the side who have fought each other before, and Ortiz winning by knockout, against Jennings. So instead of getting two good heavyweight fights, now we're just getting one. And if I had to rank them, I think the Jennings Parker fight was the most enticing for me. But hey, it is what it is, and it's business. And Parker versus White. I think Parker has enough skills to outlast White. I think White will probably tire himself out from trying to throw some like heavy shots, and he seems to have some stamina problems. So we'll see what happens though when they get in the ring.
Your reaction, Daniel, to the fact that we're going to see White and Parker instead of Dillian White Ortiz?
Number one, does that mean Dillian White is advocating his position as the number one ranked fighter in the WBC? That's number one, because this fight doesn't do a lot for me as far as keeping that, as making this a title eliminator. Which, by the way, also remember, to do this fight, they took him out of another title eliminator, Recruit Pulev, to become the IBF mandatory. Like I said, to get the rematch with Joshua. It's an interesting dynamic because obviously this fight's going to be in the UK. There's no way around about it. Because obviously if Dillian White would have fought Cruz Pulev, this fight would have been in the US. And to a promoter that was not Matchroom, and we know how Eddie Hearn feels about that. The issue probably is going to be is this more of can be seen as a world title caliber fight, or just could just be seen as a domestic fight, because obviously the audience is the UK. This is pretty much leveraging to see which of these guys that lost to Joshua should garner a rematch for Joshua. White guy knocked out, Parker didn't. So it's a very interesting fight. I am disappointed that Brian Jennings, unfortunately, is not going to be able to fight a top guy, but who knows, because there is Big Baby Miller out there for Jennings, and we know Philly and New York, they love to trash talk.
Yeah. I'm not mad at this. Parker and Jennings would have been a very intriguing matchup, as would have uh, Dillian White and Ortiz. That would have been TNT, no doubt about it. But the fact that we have Parker and White, that's good. You know, uh, good for them and good for the heavyweight division. I like to see the top heavyweights fight each other. So again, I have no real issue with that. Let's move on. Start previewing fights. Only one fight I want to mention in the preview segment. Errol Spence fighting his mandatory Carlos Ocampo. I'll go to you, Jacob. Spence coming home to Texas. I believe this fight is happening in Dallas on Showtime. I mean, listen, Jacob, I've seen Ocampo. I've seen him in 2-3 fights on YouTube doing some research. And one, after watching him, I'm questioning how he became a mandatory contender. Two, coming off of Crawford's win and the emerging discussion about a potential Crawford Spence showdown or fight down the line, Spence needs to look good in this bout, and I think he really can, because I look at Ocampo and I do not see not one advantage that he has over Spence. He could try to box from the outside, but one, he doesn't have the footwork, and two, he doesn't have the skill set to box Crawford from the outside. So he's better. So Crawford is better on the outside, and if he tries to stand there and trade with, Ocampo is not good. Is not as good from a skill perspective than Spence on the outside. And if he tries to stand there and trade with Spence, he's done. So for me, even though this is a mandatory, this is as much of a showcase fight for Spence, because I just don't see anything that Ocampo can do from a speed perspective, a strength perspective, so a skill perspective, or even power. I don't see anything Ocampo has that can trouble Errol Spence at all. Your thoughts, Jacob?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, short of Ocampo, bringing dirt in his hand and rubbing it in Spence's face, that's probably the only chance he has. IBF's rankings are, and their mandatories to me have always been really weird. I know they're the sanctioning body that actually follows their own rules for the most part, but their rankings are crazy. But I agree with you also in the sense that Spence has to blow this guy out. He can't hang around and not look impressive. Fighting a lower, less opponent as a compo. But I think Spence knows that, and I know he was watching the Crawford fight, and all the talk that's going to be going on about them matching up, and with Thurman on the bench, and you got Garcia and Porter, fighting. I think he wants to show, I'm the guy, I'm the man of the division. Not this guy who just came up and had his, first fight in the division. I'm the guy to beat. I'm the champ. So I think he will go out there and blast him. And I don't think it'll be a very competitive fight. I look for Spence to get an early knockout. I would say maybe like in the third round.
Your thoughts, Daniel? I was on your show last night with Francis and Joe from Four Boxing, and again, I'll just reiterate what I said there. You asked the question: does how impressive, what would be satisfactory for Spence in this upcoming fight? And I was saying that 4 6 round knockout and dominant throughout. And based on my research of Ocampo, I think that Errol Spence really has a chance to look impressive and just make mincemeat of this dude. Your thoughts?
Yeah, that's what I thought as well. It has to be emphatic. I said, so it has to be emphatic. It has to be clear because obviously you're fighting in your home state. This is a homecoming. And you have to really look impressive. You always want to look impressive in homecoming fights, but this one is really impressive considering how Bud did last Saturday. Because, like we mentioned when we were reviewing the Crawford fight, the comparisons are starting. The drum beat is already starting for Crawford Spence, so he has to make a point in this fight. Whether or not it can actually be emphatic enough, I would probably say it has to be within the first 4 rounds. Don't even let it get close to the fight being made official in the cards. Just beat Ocampo down, which he can, pretty easily, mind you, and beat him to a pulp, and then just go out there and say, I want Bud. I want the winner of Porter Garcia. And obviously still, I want Keith sometime Thurman. Because Errol Spence, like we mentioned before, he is the boogeyman in the division. He is the guy right now that when people mention his name or people bring him up, the room gets quiet.
Well, they just say they just put a Sean Porter and say, I don't want none of them.
Mm-hmm. And like I said, other than him trying to get the winner of Pacquiao Matisse, that's the only thing he can do right now. Demand the other champions. And he's going to have a case because obviously the welterweight division is still someone has a shadow cast of the Maypac era because Pacquiao's still around. And if Pacquiao beats Matisse, we know then he'll be a mandatory for the WWE. He'll be a mandatory technically for Keith Thurman. We mentioned earlier. He's technically the number 1 contender right now for Crawford's title. So that shadow's still there. Spence has to do a very good job of not only beating Ocampo, pretty much crushing him. And make the case known that this era's dead. I'm the top guy now. If people want to say who the champion was, they have to come see me.
Indeed, and I think again, the situation is just set right up for him. It's like this is like a hanging curveball, and he's just sitting on it, and he's ready to, I believe, knock it out the park, big time out the park. And I think we're going to start shutting the show down. On that note, I want to thank those who Sean Hop. Okay. Before we end, question from Hop in the chat. He's asking, is there speculation about who Thurman will supposedly fight on August 4th? Do you know anything about that before we decide to shut things down? Daniel, Jacob?
Didn't we say Benavidez maybe?
Yeah, Benavidez was, I think, one of the options.
This is Thurman now. This is Thurman. I said Crawford. I meant Thurman. Excuse me.
Oh, Thurman?
Yeah.
We don't know that we don't know if that guy's ever gonna fight, man. He's too busy playing his flute.
Well, let's look. Actually, let's do that. Let's look at the WBA rankings right now. So let's see. World Boxing Association. And let's see what the rankings are. Going to the WBA website right now. And at welterweight, because I think we all know it's reached the point where it's going to be a mandatory fight most likely. Lo and behold, number one contender obviously is Manny Pacquiao, and number two, and this will be hilarious, Jesse Vargas.
But he's already pulled out of that potential fight earlier.
And that's why I find hilarious. He may be forced to go back to Jesse Vargas.
So, yeah, I'm with Jacob on this one.
Yeah.
I'm questioning. I'm official now. I'm questioning whether this guy has the real desire to fight. It's been over a year now. He's talked about twice having this comeback fight, both being postponed. I've even heard that there are issues with this fight in August. So I don't know what El DeBarge Boxing is going to do right now. I really don't. I'm taking the stance with him that I took with Fury for the longest. Show me something when you finally step in the ring, bro. Until then, I.
Well, I wouldn't go as far as Fury, because Fury just decided to become a character in Grand Theft Auto. When he wanted to fight and just decided to get hopped up on all the coke. Thurman is just, I think, people mention. I know people want to say that ever since he got married, he hasn't had the desire to fight. I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that he's as a human being, he's a pretty well-rounded individual. He does have a lot of varying interests. And boxing, even though he does something good, it's something that he may not want to do. Maybe I'll give him this card. Maybe he's looking at Timothy Bradley and noticing, we have to remember after the Provodnikov fight, Bradley said he was still slurring for 3 months straight after that type of fight. And considering the fight that he had with Sean Porter, as the intensity in that fight, he may actually legitimately be trying to say it may not be worth it, but if that's your mindset, then let it be known. Let somebody else fight for the title. Then let Pacquiao Matisse be for the full WBA belt. Because otherwise, you're just being Adonis Stevenson. You're holding the belt hostage.
I don't know. I just think it's desire. I question that theory because he hasn't gone through a Provodnikov bout. He just hasn't. I just think it's a question of desire, and the fact that he's injury prone. It's the fact that not desire. I think it's the fact that he's pretty well-rounded guy, to your point, and I also think it's the fact that he's injury prone. He's had multiple injuries in his career, and because of that, and the fact that you have a guy by the name of Spence floating around at 147, that his desire is waning. Plus the fact that he's married now and he's all kinds of happy and everything. Again, I question his desire. Go ahead, Jacob.
I mean, I have no doubt he's scared of Spence. If you look at the Keith Thurman pre-champion, that guy was talking so much shit about he wants to fight everybody. He wants to fight Mayweather. He wants to fight everybody. He's all about fighting, blah, 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 blah. Then he gets the belt, and, Spence, is supposed to be his mandatory, and he can't even look him in the eye, man. It's like every time they get those two together, it's always like there's always this kind of calm about it, and it's not that talking anymore. And, maybe he'll fight Peterson. I know Peterson lots of Spence, but I actually think Peterson could beat Thurman. I think with the right game plan, Peterson could beat Thurman. And maybe that's what Thurman needs. Sometimes these fighters kind of almost like an engine to get jump started again. They need to lose. They need to lose something so that they can, kind of climb back on the horse. And it really shows, whether you're, if you're going to be a true champion, a true fighter, can you get back on that horse and charge back into, into the battle? Many great boxers throughout time, champions, have lost. But then it's really that the true sense of a champion is what do they do after that loss? Like, do they adjust? Do they come back? So, and in a weird way, if Thurman is still serious about the sport, I don't think a loss would be a bad thing for him. It would basically show us, the fans, what kind of fighter he really is. So, if he does get back in the ring, if he can stay not injured, quotations, you know, I want to see Spence get that shot because he earned it. But I just don't. I just think he's scared.
Um, Hop in the chat said, I think if Keith is struggling with motivation, I wish he would just be honest and admit it. Who knows? I don't dislike Keith Thurman personally. As a boxing fan, I hope we do see him back in the ring again. And Sean said, situation with Thurman, it reminds him of Kazuta Ioka, who retired after getting married. Um, what did also Hop say here in the chat? I think at this point, Thurman genuinely needs a tune-up fight rather than a rugged challenge. True, but at this point, I'm questioning whether he's even wants to have a quote quote tune-up fight. So forget the rugged challenge against a Thurm, against a Spence, or a rematch against Garcia, or rematch against Porter, or or even a Peterson. The issue with me is the motivation just to have a fight, period, tune up guy or otherwise. And I think we're going to start shutting the show down. On that note, I'll go to you, Jacob, from Jab Hook. For folks who want to talk the sweet science, and for those who want to talk movies, let the folks know where they can find you. And then you can follow up Daniel for folks who want to talk the sweet science, or for those who want to talk the NBA. Let the people know where they can hit you up.
Yeah, I can be found on Twitter, JRATM23. You can shout me out there if you want to talk movies, you want to talk boxing. That's where I am, and like I like to go to a lot of the live fights. So if you're in the local LA area and you're going to a fight, hit me up and on Twitter and see if we can get together.
Yes, folks. You can find me on Twitter at Raucus99. And like I say, you can listen to the show at forboxingnews.com and most likely and SoundCloud, and opening up to new platforms, I think, shortly. Podcasts that we do with the folks at For Boxing News, Joe and Francis. I said Mike was on the show yesterday. Hopefully, we're going to try to get a set schedule, what day to do it here for future plans. And ultimately, hopefully by the end of this week and hopefully next week, we'll actually be talking about Joshua Wilder the way we just talked about Canelo Triple G.
Again, I want to thank Sean and Hop for joining us in the chat. And you asked the question, Hop, and I asked to hear to the fellas. No, so thank you. You said thank you to me for mentioning your question. No problem, man. No problem. That's what we do. For those who want to talk to sweet science, music, fitness with me, you know what it is on Twitter, Brother JR, at Brother JR76. As I said to begin the show, if you want to find out all things pound for pound boxing report, on the blog page is the place to go to, P4P Boxing Report .wordpress.com. That's the link. Check the Riley page for the links to the channels and pages, Facebook, G+, YouTube, Twitter, Tumblr, and also links to where to listen to the show, SoundCloud, iTunes, Google Play Music, Stitcher Radio, Player FM, as well as Mixcloud. On the next episode, we will do a recap of Spence and Ocampo. Didn't talk about this fight during the show, but we will also do a recap of Danny Roman fighting Moises Flores for a junior featherweight belt. Also, we would do a preview. We may talk Angel Acosta. He's defending his junior flyweight belt in his home country of Puerto Rico. We will and we will do a preview of women's boxing doubleheader that's taking place on Showtime in Detroit. Clarissa Shields is fighting Hannah Gabriels on the undercard of that. Christina Hammer, she will be fighting Tori Nelson. Shields and Gabriels fighting for the two belts at middleweight. Hammer, Shields and Gabriel's going to be IBF, WBA middleweight belts, while Hammer, she's going to be defending her WBC, WBO belts with the anticipation should both Shields and Hammer win, they'll fight each other in the fall. We will also do a preview of Miguel Burchelt. He's going to be fighting Jonathan Barros on ESPN Plus. So yeah, we're going to talk about those bouts. So for Jacob from the Inscriber, Jacob from Jab Hook, excuse me, Daniel from the Inscriber, I'm your host, Michael. This has been episode 211 of the Pound for Pound Box Report. We will see you guys next time. Everyone, have a good evening. Good night.
Good night. Shout
Good
out to
evening,
Gail and Bo.
Shout out to Gail and Bo. Shout out to Gus, EJ Boxing Live, and the crew over there. Nauta, Charlie, Beats, Natty, Chris Caban, Scorsese, Ben Umar.
The ladies love boxing.
Ladies Love Boxing crew, Miss Fight Lady. Yeah, Miss Fight Lady and everybody from the Ladies Love Boxing crew. So everybody again, have a good evening, good night.